last time we started looking at thematic relations among constituents of a sentence, and then we were looking at what are those constituents which have got thematic relations among one another. In order to look at thematic relations, we started talking about categorial selections and semantic selections. Remember, categorial selections and semantic selections. The idea of categorial selections, the idea behind that discussion was there are two types of things in a sentence. Rather, there are two aspects through which we can look at a sentence. So far, we have been looking at a sentence from the perspective of grammatical relations, such as subjects and objects, right? Subjects and objects are grammatical relations. No NP is inherently a subject or no NP is inherently an object. Depending upon a sentence, an NP could be in a subject position or it could be in an object position. Okay? And then we know about rest of the constituents of a sentence. So, like subjects and objects are thematic relations in a sentence, we started looking at like subjects and objects are grammatical relations in a sentence, we started looking at thematic relationships. And then today I will talk to you about the whole, how to summarize the whole thing, and the way we look at thematic relationship in a sentence is called theta theory. Okay? There are several, not several, at least some of the things which are needed to connect both structural relations and thematic relations, grammatical relations and thematic relations. Give it a couple of days and you will see the connection between the two. And also shortly we are going to look at, in a way you understand this, but as a practical demonstration we will see how a sentence, in fact we looked at it little bit, how a sentence is bigger than an IP, right? Remember when we were talking about, when we started talking about a CP, how a sentence is bigger than an IP, and also how the subject position of a sentence can be, what have you seen so far in the subject position of a sentence? Mostly an NP, right? You will see how in a subject position of a sentence we can have things which are bigger than an NP, that is sometimes an IP, and maybe bigger elements as well. And all these things put together give us a recursive, give us recursiveness for which languages are famous. So we come to that, and then these things will make little bit more sense. So let's look at first the relationship between first the two perspectives, and then the unified statement about a theta theory. We have looked at endocentricity. I'm only going through these things just to refresh your memory. Then we started looking at categorial selections, and we simply meant to put the point forth that certain elements, certain categories take specific objects or subcategorizes for specific elements, and this is called categorial selection. For example, nouns like know, ask and wonder, how these verbs like know, ask and wonder, how these verbs can have only certain things as its object. And such a restriction is called categorial selection, and we call that this verb know subcategorizes for an NP, it can subcategorize for a CP, and it can also subcategorize for a question sentence. This is what we meant. And again, I want to underline, when we are talking about know, ask and wonder, we are not talking about all the verbs. We are only talking about these verbs. This is what is important about categorial selections. Similarly, we looked at some adjectives, nouns and prepositions, how they require certain types of complements. In other words, how they subcategorize for only certain types of elements. Okay? And when we started looking at semantic selection, that is S selection, and we were talking about differences between categorial selection and semantic selection, that is C selection and S selection, we looked at different ways of saying things so that things will be clearer. The same thing, that a verb know subcategorizes for an NP or an IP or a CP or a question sentence. We say, with respect to semantic selection, a verb know, for verb know, complement must be a question or a proposition. It's just that we don't use grammatical terminology for this thing. Keep in mind, a short discussion that we have gone through about autonomy of syntax. We have discussed that there is evidence available in natural language which shows us, with the help of that, we can argue that syntax is independent of semantics. That is, meaning of a sentence has very little to do with grammatical composition of a sentence. A sentence can be totally meaningless and still be grammatical. That's the baseline argument for autonomy of syntax or independence of syntax. However, that's not enough. We do have evidence in natural language which also suggests that not necessarily it is independent all the time. All right, fine. It looks independent to great extent, but not all the way. And this is what selectional restriction tells us, that for a sentence to be more meaningful, not in the semantic terms, for a sentence, the point is, sentences do care about semantic relations as well. Otherwise, we don't really get a grammatical sentence, and a lot of times grammaticality of sentence may depend on semantic selections as well. That's all is the point there. There is something called lexical selection, and in this category you will see that verbs or different elements select for a particular lexical item. Why, how, we don't know much about that, but I just want to show you a list of some of the things. For example, if we are talking about a verb like rely or depend, it can only allow a postposition on. It doesn't allow other postpositions. We never say rely for or rely in or depend in, stuff like that. Remember, we are not talking about categorical selection at this time. The difference between lexical selection and a categorical selection is the following. For a categorical selection, we were talking about the full phrase, and how a verb is selecting an NP or CP or IP. In semantic selection, we were talking about how a verb selects a question sentence or a proposition or a sentence itself. In lexical selection, we are talking about pure lexical elements like preposition, namely preposition that you see on the screen. Are you with me? So far, are these things making sense? If there is a doubt, please let me know. We are only talking about the terms so far, and then I want to go to thematic relations in a moment. Making sense? Okay. And then you see further more verbs like hope and toy, and the list goes on. The point here is, and the reason why I have given only 3 examples is very simple. We never see any other postposition with a verb hope. Okay? It sounds too strong a statement. Just check it. Okay? Listen to people or try to make a sentence with anything else. And this forces someone to look at it in terms of lexical selection. We don't know. I mean, this is not an explanation that I am giving you. I am categorically telling you we don't know why. But it's a statement of fact that it doesn't seem to be taking any other element. What's the relationship between hope and for, rely on, we don't know. And like I have been telling you and trying to connect one point that we have made way too early in the class, and it will be a contribution of this class if you can take or if you can really internalize only a few points, even a few points at the end of it. If not a huge success, that will be a partial success of the things that we have been discussing with. Again, remember knowledge of language, where we know that we know a lot of things about language. We do a lot of things about language. It's just that we don't know how to explain them. Some of the things we know, some of the things people have studied, and then things have become clearer. And still there are lots of things that we just don't know. Invariably, irrespective of dialectal variations or language variation, speakers of English will only take on with rely. What kind of restriction operates in human mind? This definitely seems to be part of knowledge of language, more so because we don't know why and has not been explained so far. And then the list goes on and on. Nouns like love and desire. Remember, these 2 words are not verbs here. When they are used as nouns, then they take these things. The noun desire does not seem to take off, and it takes for. I'm only knowing very well. I'm only showing you the list without giving you an explanation for this thing. And I'm not giving you explanation because we don't know the reason for that. So again, and these 3 sentences make the point that I have just a minute ago discussed with you, that we do need to look at semantic selection or selectional restrictions like categorial selection, semantic selections, and lexical selection in order to make sentences grammatical. And these sentences are not preceded by a star mark because they are not ungrammatical sentences. We have only put a hash mark because they are semantically not, I don't know how to say, semantically not appropriate sentences. It doesn't mean much. That's all we can say about these sentences. Am I right? I don't mean to get into the arguments like in a certain context, buildings walk slowly might be true. Okay, might be. I'm not talking about true and false values of these sentences. What I'm saying, maybe contextually allowed. If you are looking at a computer game, then this sentence may be perfectly all right in a given context. But you know what I mean, and I'm only talking about selectional restrictions, and in the larger context these sentences are grammatical but doesn't seem to be working quite well. All right? So with these things we have only tried to make a single point, which is keeping autonomy of syntax in mind. We do feel, or we do happen to need to look at selectional restrictions as well for sentences to make sense, which in turn eventually means to say that we cannot really say fully all the way that syntax is independent. Okay? And this is where we stop. Now, look at these statements. Are we clear about subcategorized elements now? Subcategorized elements in a sentence. The sentences that are the elements that are required in a sentence. Okay? So this is the story about those subcategorized elements. That just like grammatically they are going to be either noun or an object, either a subject or an object, semantically speaking, they also get names, semantic names. So thematic relations talks about semantic roles, semantic relations. Is this making sense? Let me repeat this thing again. We are talking at two different levels. We are talking about grammatical level and we are talking about semantic level. At a grammatical level, we have seen relationship between elements, subcategorized elements in a sentence in terms of subjects, objects, right? Among objects, we have seen some of the things are direct objects, some of the things could be indirect objects, right? Semantically speaking, that is looking at the same sentence from semantic perspectives, we find that they also seem to have some sort of semantic roles, which are partly governed by syntactic roles. Keep this in mind, which are partly governed by syntactic roles. This is why I wanted to make the point first that syntax does not seem to be independent of semantics all the way. That is, there is no complete autonomy between syntax and semantics. To a great extent, syntax do look independent, but not all the way, because there seems to be some overlap between them. And therefore, I want you to see a description of semantic roles and how those subcategorized elements are described semantically in a sentence. Is this okay? And then what we are going to discuss is going to make sense. Is the distinction between syntactic level and semantic level clear to everybody? Are we okay with the syntactic relations? Do we understand what we mean by syntactic relations? Then we can look at semantic relations among those elements from the semantic perspective. And then we can see how grammatical relations kind of force, I don't want to use the word govern because that's coming soon, it's a technical term, how grammatical relations kind of force semantic relations. Okay? So, And we start with this statement that every argument, that is every subcategorized argument, must have one and only one thematic role assigned in a sentence. So for example, if you have a sentence like this, Brad hit Andrew, how many subcategorized, how many arguments do you see here? One or two? And this, at this point we will need to make this thing clear. Grammatically speaking, subjects are out of predicate. Everybody with me? Subjects are out of predicate, right? So we can say, as far as verbs are concerned, it has only one object. It helps you decide only one NP, that is within the predicate, and it has no control over subject. In other words, we end up saying that subjects are always there anyway, right? Without a subject, we don't have a sentence at all. Therefore, we don't talk about subjects with relation to verbs. Semantically speaking, this is going to have two different arguments. One is Brad and the other is Andrew. And for a moment, please don't look at it in terms of subjects and objects. Okay? It has two arguments, Brad and Andrew. These two arguments have two different roles in a sentence. Okay? Two different roles in a sentence. And at this point, I want to take you back, all the way back, when I asked you a question for the first time about the subject. What is a subject? And several of you, or at least some of you, talked about subject is someone who does something, right? And when I was talking about verbs, I do remember some people talking about something that the action is acted upon. Some of the description of those types. At this point, I want to bring that in, that such descriptions are semantic descriptions, where what we actually mean to say that we are not defining subjects, we are defining agents. When we say subject does something, we are talking about agents. So in this sentence, one of the arguments, that is Brad, is the agent of what? Agent of the action carried on. Okay? And this should be with the smallest sentence, it should be pretty clear to you that only Brad is carrying out this action, right? We are not using the verb fight. If we had the verb fight, then the story would have been different, because in a fight, several other people could be agents. But when we are talking about hitting, only one could hit the other. The person who is getting hit may have no role at all in being hit. See this thing? So, look at the semantics of this verb, or semantic description of its argument, that one is the agent, and then we will see what the other is. So there are two arguments. What the first statement simply means is one and only one role has to be assigned to arguments in a sentence. If there are two arguments, both of them will have one and only one role. Both of them will not have the same role. That is, Brad and Andrew both cannot be agents. Okay? Brad can be assigned one role and Andrew can be assigned one role. Confusions? Problems? They are coming up. But at this stage, any confusion, any problems? No? All right. The second statement, X bar theory generates sentences and theta theory is a checking condition. Is this making sense to you? And if the second part doesn't, just take it as a value, take it for the value of the first part, that X bar theory helps us generate sentences. That is, X bar theory helps us describe how sentences are generated. And then we'll talk about the second part later, how thematic relations, how the way to look at thematic relations, which is called theta theory, is a checking condition on them. Okay? In fact, it's not too difficult. Theta theory here simply means about selectional restriction. And then selectional restriction becomes a checking condition for grammaticality of a sentence. No. I qualified that. What we mean by how it generates sentences is it helps us describe, understand a sentence.
Yeah, parse a sentence, but how do we generate, like how does it explain generation?
No. That's not what it means. What I'm telling you, what it means is not just how to parse a sentence. It helps us understand how different elements in a sentence are related and how sentence works in human mind. Okay, that's all it does. It's not really a physical tool, right? It's not really a candy machine in which you put something and it gets you candy. Is this making sense? It's a tool, artificial tool, hypothetical tool for us to understand if we are speaking a sentence, how did that happen that several elements are connected? And then what makes a sentence grammatical? For us to understand underlying patterns, X bar theory is just a tool to understand that. It's not a like I gave you the example, it's not a machine, you put raw elements in it and it gives you candies. So in that sense it doesn't generate sentences. All right? Okay. These are just the names and which describes elements in a sentence. Now look at there is a whole list of names of thematic relations given in one of the chapters in your book. I have only taken few of them for us to go through. I do suggest you to look at that chapter, that part of the chapter carefully to understand these things. And here I want you to understand very simple point. When we say sentences like Bob saw the car, okay, Bob saw the car, or okay, just let's look at the first sentence. Bob saw the car. Do you see that with respect to two verbs that you have seen so far, hit and see, right? With respect to two verbs, hit and see, do you see the difference between the kinds of role Brad and Bob are playing in these two sentences? No. Yes or no? You see, what's that difference? With respect to hit and see, when we say Brad hit Andrew and Bob saw the car, what's the difference?
Brad sort of did the action himself and Bob saw the car is not necessarily something that he instigated. Yes, the car was there and he just saw it.
Right. Everybody understands this? It's not as subtle either. Right? It's quite obvious. When we talk about hit, it requires some physical activity, action, right? And with respect to that, seeing is less eventful. See this thing? Therefore, there is a difference between the roles of Brad and Bob. In the first sentence, Brad clearly seems to be an agent of the action. In this one, Bob is different. Okay? And one can argue that it still is an agent of seeing, which is okay. And this is why I said things are going to get complicated a little further. But it still does not contradict what we said earlier, that argument will have only one and only one theta role. You can assign it agent depending on how you perceive it. If you think seeing requires some action, in that case it's agent for you. If you think there is a difference, not subtle, obvious difference between hit and see, then you can assign a different theta role to this. All right? See this thing? And larger point is, the difference between Brad hit Andrew and Bob saw the car is not only captured through its grammatical relations. For the difference between the two sentences and the nature of the two predicates, looking at semantic relations is also important. Therefore, semantics doesn't seem to be completely independent. I'm sorry, syntax does not seem to be completely autonomous of semantic relations. All right? We have more sentences. We can go through that, but I want to leave them for you to look at. When we say syntax frightens Jim, right? Is Jim the subject of the sentence? Not. Grammatically speaking, Jim is not the subject of the sentence. What is Jim? Grammatically speaking, object of the sentence, right? But semantically speaking, you can realize that Jim becomes the experiencer, right? An experiencer of what? Fear, right? So, when we say experiencer or agent is agency can very clearly be mapped onto subject, right? But other theta roles cannot be directly mapped onto their grammatical counterparts like subjects and objects. This is also not a contradiction, but not a direct overlap either. Understand this point? There is the mapping between semantic roles and grammatical relations are not one-to-one. It's not that subjects are the only one. See, look at the next sentence. Suzanne loves cookies, right? Cookies are not the experiencer. The argument which is experiencer of love is not cookies, but Susan. And once the role is assigned, it's done. And again here, one can argue, no. I don't think it's really experiencer. It is an agent. The fight is not whether it's an agent or experiencer. The point is, once you think when I say once you think, what I mean is, once a native speaker decides that for me, for my English, it seems to me as experiencer. Done. For the other native speaker, if it looks like an agent, done. But for the same speaker, it cannot be two, both, experiencer and agent. Okay? That's the point. All right. There is one or two more that I want you to see. The next one is called theme. Okay? And it has its description, you can read that, but more importantly, look at the examples. Mary loves cookies. Right? Compared to both the thematic relations that you have seen so far, agent and experiencer. Is cookies an agent here? Definitely not. Right? If at all we can classify this agency to something, that is going to be Mary. Right? If at all, and if we don't want to call Mary an agent, in that case we can call it experiencer. But Mary is definitely not theme. Theme is, you see the description, and the argument cookies seems to be qualifying for this role of being theme. Any difficulty, problems? No? All right. And likewise we have few more, like goal, recipient, source, location, instrument, and there is a huge list of these things. Once again I do ask you to look at it in the chapter carefully, and if there are questions based on that, please let me know. And with each one of them, the reason why I am not going through each one of them with you is because it's just a list. Important thing to keep in mind is what we saw as the first sentence and what I have been telling you. And let me repeat this thing before we look at Theta Criterion once again. At one level, there seems to be total disconnect between syntax and semantics, which is called autonomy of syntax. You have seen one example. Researchers with lots of more examples vigorously argue for that sometimes. For us, this is not a religion. We are only trying to understand how people have looked at language. So we need to look at several perspectives. We are not going to commit ourselves to one view or the other. So my job here is not to show you only one part of the story, that no, syntax is independent of semantics. Understand this? There appears to be evidence in natural language which shows that syntax may not totally be independent of semantics. And lot of semantic components have to play some role or the other, if not everything, some role or the other on constraining syntax. Okay? For that, we looked at C selection, that is categorical selection, S selection, semantic selection, and lexical selection. Putting all these things together, we call them some sort of semantic criteria as semantic selection, in terms of the fact that sentences do care about these things too. Otherwise, they may be okay in a given context, but does not seem to be appropriate right away. Then we have looked at, with the help of that, we are able to see two different levels. That is a grammatical level in a sentence and a semantic level in a sentence. Grammatically speaking, the different terms, subjects and objects, are grammatical relations. Similarly, several elements that are arguments in a sentence have different roles to play. and these are the names of those roles. These names are not mapped one to one with grammatical relations. Okay? And what happens though is once, to a great extent it seems like agents are all the time subjects, or subjects are getting agent theta role to a great extent. However, other examples show that not necessarily there is one-to-one mapping between grammatical relations and thematic relations. However, what we observe categorically is once an argument is assigned a thematic role, it keeps that thematic role, and one argument cannot be assigned more than one thematic role in a sentence at a time. Just like any NP can potentially be the subject in one sentence and the same NP can be object in other sentence, similarly outside the sentence the NPs will change their semantic role, but in a sentence one NP, one argument must be assigned one and only one thematic role, and this is called thematic criterion or theta criterion. And therefore, with the list, I have only suggested that you take a look at that list on your own with the thing in mind that whether you call something an experiencer or an agent is depending upon native speaker's intuition. However, for people studying language, people looking at natural language in these terms, and particularly when we are not the native speaker of, let's say, language like English, we can only say that whether an argument is agent or patient or experiencer can only depend on the nature of the verb. For example, for a verb like hit, the agent, the argument which is in the subject position cannot be experiencer, cannot be patient, it has to be an agent. Only when we look at other verbs like love, in a sentence like John loves Mary, how do I say that John is an agent? It could be an experiencer. Then the complication begins. My point is, for a non-native speaker to look at these things, we need to look at the nature of the verb, and the answer is located there, that is in the verb. For a native speaker, these things are categorically clear. In our languages too, we have these things clarified. And again, I have already given you one example of knowledge of language. This will be another one, that all these restrictions that you have seen, and both the levels of semantic level or grammatical level, whether they are independent or not, they are all here. We all know these things. Rather, in other words, we don't need to know these things obviously when we are speaking in the language, which helps us understand that these things are part of knowledge of language. And on the basis of these things, the term knowledge of language is a technical term. All right? Okay. Clear about theta criterion? It's just a nice play of the words that you put it in a particular way to restrict or present it in the way that I have been describing to you. Again, I do want you to look at the examples carefully in the book. Adjuncts are not included in thematic grid, that is in theta grid. So, only subcategorized arguments are part of thematic relations, not adjuncts. Remember the distinction between adjuncts and complement? So, adjuncts are not part of thematic grid. So, verbs are not responsible for giving thematic roles to agents. this is another example for us to understand that agents are really not required part of sentences from both syntactic perspectives and semantic perspectives. Okay? They are optionals and all kinds of things that you have seen. John put the book on the table on Friday. On the table is a subcategorized element. If that is missing, the sentence is going to be ungrammatical. We cannot say John put the book on Friday. Okay? So that tells you, however, John put the book on the table is perfectly a grammatical sentence. Even if we don't say on Friday, it doesn't have any bearing on grammaticality of the sentence. Therefore, in this sentence, on the table will have a thematic relation, will have a thematic role, and when you look at the list carefully, you will see that this has a thematic role location, but on Friday will not have a thematic role because that's an adjunct. That's another way, another distinction between complement and adjuncts, that complements get thematic roles, adjuncts do not get thematic roles. When we were discussing the distinction between complement and adjuncts, we had not discussed thematic relations. Therefore, we didn't talk about this distinction. Clear? Give me another 2 minutes and I'll wind it up. So this is the grid that I want you to see carefully. Just 2 grids in the next 2 minutes. So in this kind of a sentence, these are the thematic relations. Okay? And these are theta roles. Now, I want you to look at the grid. See, for a predicate verb like love, it has 2 grids. One is experiencer, the other is theme. So when we say John loves Mary, at a semantic level, if both the grids are filled, right, that is, both the arguments are present, John and Mary, do you see the co-indices there for this verb, then the sentence is grammatical. Semantically speaking, the sentence is okay. However, the reason why we just cannot say John loves, and the sentence becomes not acceptable or ungrammatical, because the other element, other argument in the thematic grid is empty. It's not filled. Therefore, this sentence is not acceptable. See this thing? Now, one more. John loves Mary Megan. Okay? Here, pay attention to the sentence. We are not saying John loves Mary and Megan. And don't get into extra semantic meanings. Okay, I mean one person may love 10 different people. Those are not the things that we are talking about here. The moment we put John loves Mary and Megan becomes one element, and they will fulfill the requirement of theme, and therefore the sentence is grammatical. If we are saying John loves Mary Megan, the problem here is Megan becomes an additional argument for which there is no place in the thematic grid of the verb love. Therefore, the sentence is ungrammatical. See, again, with these grids, I am only trying to tell you that these relations and semantic level do have something to do with grammaticality of a sentence. Therefore, not complete autonomy. All right? Anyway, I mean, these are the same things that I want that you can look at the book. I did want to talk about one particular sentence. Sentences like it rained, and I'm not going to discuss this thing. We will discuss this tomorrow before we begin. Have you heard these kind of sentences? It rains, right? Can we say only rains? Okay, no. We have to say it rains. Why? We'll discuss that tomorrow. Okay, please look at this chapter. This is not part of that chapter. Okay, just the earlier part which we have discussed. Please look at that, and then we will talk more about it tomorrow.